Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Late Night Table Talk. My name's Eric Yurko. I'll be your host tonight, and it's approaching midnight in Jakarta, so we should probably get started. Joining me tonight is one of my favorite people in the industry, Banana Chan. We're going to talk a little bit about RPGs, what she's up to, and what she's already worked on, so get excited for that. But before we have her join us, there are a few things I want to talk with you all about. Again, as I've done in previous and future episodes, I want to thank you all for watching Late Night Table Talk. As I've mentioned, this is sort of our pre-season, so we're having a few guests on, I'm checking out the format, I'm trying to figure out what works, and I'm going to see whether or not this is something I want to keep doing after our pre-season. So if you like it, let me know in the comments. If there are things you'd like to see or people you'd like to see me talk to, let me know and we'll see what we can get spun up. Cool. So, what I want to talk with you all about tonight is RPGs, as you might have known with guests from the row behind me. So I know that I'm fairly localized to the board game space, but I've been playing a fair number of tabletop RPGs over the past few years, and I kind of want to talk about how they overlap with board games, the cool things they do that board games don't do, and also just neat ones that I've been trying lately. So, when I'm talking about RPGs, I'm talking more about, I think the closest thing we get to them in the board game space is what we would call more storytelling games. So, Machine of Death, Legacy of Dragonhold, games like that. Games where you're really focusing more on generating a story between the characters. These games in particular are going to be a little bit, I'd say, longer. It's rare to see an RPG that lasts for under an hour or two, at least in the experience that I've had with various RPGs. And I tend to like RPGs that get into odd, offbeat, or exciting topics that I don't normally get to see. So I'll talk you through a few cool ones that I've been playing and things that I enjoy about them, and then we'll move on talking to Banana. So the big one that I've been playing lately is I've been playing a mixture of Dungeons and Dragons and Starfinder. So Dungeons and Dragons had a few editions over the years. You've almost certainly heard of it. Roll some dice, do some combat, skill checks, etc., etc. It's very large, so I don't feel like I need to go into it in a particularly large amount of depth. Similar to that is Starfinder. Starfinder is essentially a branch of Pathfinder, which is, I think, a branch of Dungeons and Dragons 3.5. But it's set mostly in space, more sci-fi stuff. I tend to play the same character archetypes whenever I go through them, which is a character who has been blessed with ignorance of how ridiculous he is, and we just sort of see where we can get from there. Those are all fun, but if you're looking for something a little bit more off of that main pathway, there's a lot of cool stuff happening in the RPG space as well, and I think those are worth mentioning. So, two that I don't have behind me are Icarus, which was just recently published from Renegade. So what it is you are a society at the height of its power, the height of its progress, and you want to do what every great society has done, which is build a tower so tall that God will both take notice and be mildly impressed. You have, of course, no knowledge of pretty much the obvious thing that's going to happen as you attempt to build this tower, but you do it anyways. The cool thing about it is that you're not only building a tower narratively, but you're also physically constructing one. So you've got a bunch of dice, these like thick, weighty dice, and as you complete events or as you do challenges in the game, you're going to keep stacking them to eventually form this massive tower. The fun thing about that is characters have motivations in the game, what they want to accomplish. So my character wanted to save as much of the population as he could. My co-player wanted to sabotage the tower, and we knew this going into it. So it was really interesting to have a game where we were obviously narratively opposed, but we still had to work collaboratively to generate a story. As soon as the tower falls, and it always falls, it's inevitable, the game essentially ends. You answer 3 questions, the game's over. It's a really, really neat system, and I'm really excited to play it more and see what stories we can generate just with that system. I had a blast with it. Another one is, it doesn't really exist in the physical sense right now, so it's hard to get something that I can display here, but I was playing a little bit of Wait For Me. Wait For Me is a journaling game where you're essentially being dragged through different points in time and you're leaving notes to yourself at different points in your life. Very interesting, a lot of fun. It was perhaps a little bit heavy for me right now. So I've set it aside, but I am going to pick it back up when I'm feeling a little bit more emotionally available for the kinds of things that I had to write. Essentially, you're writing like very specific word counts, you're journaling about it, and it was a really neat experience that was unlike any other game I've ever played. So out of the four behind me, the one that I really, really want to highlight is Dialect. So Dialect is a game from Thorny Games. It positions itself as a game about language and how it dies, and your characters essentially are cut off from the majority of society through some action, through some event, and what you do is you essentially build a dialect of your language between each other. You can construct new words, you can repurpose existing words or combine words to create new ideas, and you'll be performing scenes that demonstrate how that word fits itself into your new lifestyle, really. Inevitably, at about the midpoint of the game, you kind of need to make a decision as a group. How does your language die? It is in the tagline, so you need to expect that that's coming. You can either lose it due to reintegration, so society comes back, they find you, they're like, oh hey, come join us. Why are you using those weird words? No one says that. Stop trying to make fetch happen, etc. And your dialect eventually falls into disuse. Or you can pick the option that my group picked, which is everyone dies and the language dies with you. It is a huge bummer, but it is a very, very fun and very, very critical game to try out, especially for someone who's a bit of a language nerd like myself. Other ones here, Overlight, so that's a new one from Renegade, relatively new. Deals more with like color and how color translates to like different ideas, different actions, different emotions, and the idea of the overlight, which is that the world has been split up into 7 essentially islands that are all floating in this like nightmarish void, overlight islands sort of scenario. Very interesting. Fiasco I haven't really gotten a chance to dig into, but it came highly recommended from a few friends, and so I'm looking forward to a time in which I can play it. And then Reunification is a game from Travis Hill with art from Netters Plays, and I was very excited about both of those two, working on it as a combo, and I picked it up. You're essentially playing as a family that was divided during a like civil war in a country, and the country is reunifying, and so you're writing letters to each other to get a sense of the people that you're going to meet and how you're going to bring everything back together. I'm hoping that from this you're getting a sense of the just diverse array of themes available, and that's part of the reason that I've been really into RPGs, is that they give me a chance to explore something that isn't just, not to be dismissive or paint with a broad brush, but gem trading in the Mediterranean, or one of the 5 major themes that a lot of board games tend to have. Now, don't get me wrong, there are some cycles in the RPG space. There's a lot of medieval fantasy, there's a lot of sci-fi, and that's great. I like the variety that the experience offers, and I like that it focuses a lot more on the player interactions in I want to say not always, ideally healthy way. And there are other great titles. There's, Blades in the Dark. There's, I think it's called A Quiet Year. I picked that one up. It's a map-making one. Another map-making one that I'm really interested in is Delve. And I think that it's a nice experience to have adjacent to the board game space, although there's a lot of cross-pollination. So for instance, Meromorph, who worked on the Shipwreck Arcana, one of my favorite games, just pushed a Kickstarter for an RPG called Atma, which is more of a starter RPG. It scaffolds out a lot of the decisions that a GM or game master would have to make. So generally speaking, if you're not familiar with RPGs, you'll have someone who's in charge of covering the game experience, making sure it goes smoothly. They're essentially another player, but their job isn't to act inside of the game. Their job is to help scaffold the game together and take the role of various non-player characters that you'll meet over the course of this. So the GM here in Atma has a fair number of their work scaffolded out for them by the game itself. And that's pretty cool as well. So I think that one's on Kickstarter now, or hopefully when this releases it's still on Kickstarter, but if that sounds your speed, you should check it out. The last thing I want to talk about is And so this isn't all RPGs, but a number of RPGs use a fair number of dice. And so this is really your problem area for a lot of like Dungeons and Dragons play, role playing games play, is that once you start buying a certain number of dice, it becomes increasingly difficult to not own too many. They're very pretty. It's very hard to say no to a lot of them, and they're relatively inexpensive. You can get some pretty expensive ones, especially if you're going into like the full metal space, but strong recommendation. If you're going to do it, buy one, make peace with it, and then inevitably ignore this advice and just do whatever you're going to do anyways. Again, I'm a host of a late night gaming talk show, not someone with any real authority in this space. But yeah, I hope that gives you, a few cool RPGs to think about, a few things to check out, and I'm sure we'll hear more from Banana on what she's been playing and what she'd recommend. And so there'll hopefully be a bunch of cool ideas coming out of this episode. So look forward to that. Anyway, we should probably bring on Banana, right? So, brief intro. Banana is a game designer, publisher, writer, videographer, and probably a few things that I've left out. Even just being good at one of those things is impressive, but naturally, Banana fires on all cylinders, even going so far as to threaten to announce a game for every month of 2020. Granted, we're almost done with 2020, fingers crossed, but she's been doing it since the start of the year. Very impressive. Even got me to work on 2 with her. I actually have 1 in my notes, but as of the time of filming, it's expanded. In the interest of time, I'll let her talk more about herself, but without further ado, please welcome my friend Banana to Late Night Table Talk. Hey, Banana. Thanks so much for joining us. How you doing?
Hey, Eric. Thanks for having me. I am doing well. Throwing a
Good.
blazer, looking good.
Yeah, so my problem is I always find sitting in blazers to be like complicated for me because they kind of like swoosh to the sides near where my like thighs are, and then I'm thinking about like that the whole time. So I've been going with vests a lot more because vests, I'm like, yes, they both give me the impression of like classiness, but also they have that subtle impression that I may be confused for a valet, which like
Can't help
it's
it.
it's my cross to bear. But it's the only time I get to dress up, and the only really time I've put on anything resembling nice, and by nice I mean not gym shorts, in the last like 6 months or so. So
Well, I think you look good and you look fancy. There's
thank
that.
you. I appreciate
One
that.
person.
External validation, the thing I've always craved. Makes a note for my therapist.
Oh.
Anyway, what have you been up to? Like, what's good? How's like the Kickstarter and stuff?
The Kickstarter is going well. So the Jiangshi Kickstarter is it's funded, so that's good. Now we're just like doing all the back end stuff, which is wrangling all the writers and getting them all done hopefully soon. So there's that. The core writing is all done. It's just the scenarios and like getting all the artwork ready and doing all the layout stuff. So it's just like project management stuff from here
Right.
on out.
Well, that's exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then we
And
have we have a game together too.
yeah. I'll probably bother you a bit more about that later in the episode. We can talk more about that. But we have done at least one successful playtest, so we got that going for us.
Yeah, that was super fun.
That was fun. I got to wear sunglasses. Yeah, just the dream. I mean, I've worn sunglasses more frequently because I have left the house, but like, it's the little things.
Yeah, this year has felt like 10 years. So,
Yep. And it has just not stopped. What a wild ride even the last like 6 or 12 hours has been.
yep,
Yep.
it's something.
Yep. Ugh. No, I spent most of yesterday just playing the Super Mario 3D All Stars set. Turns out I am really bad at playing a game that came out in 1996. So that's exciting.
Oh, I mean, I get the feeling that like with newer games, like the newer the games are, the less like finicky stuff you have to think about. Like with older
Yeah.
games, it's just like, oh, jumping is this way, and I'm not going to be able to do that because I'm so used to jumping another way, which is a lot simpler in terms of the
Yeah.
physics of a game.
And collision
So,
detection is like a magical witchcraft thing in games. Like I was playing through this level where you have to like swim to the bottom of an area and there's a sunken ship. Somehow I think I collided with the ghost of where the ship like rises up to. And I was on Twitch, so there's like actual recording of this that exists somewhere. But I basically like hit some invisible thing and then was immediately teleported all the way to the bottom of the like water level. Like,
Wow.
which is super handy because the swimming mechanics in Super Mario 64 are how you would say not great. They are, but it saved me a lot of swimming. So indebted to some designer in like probably the early 90s for that mistake. Yeah.
Hey, whatever works.
Yep. Anyway, it's wild. But let's move on to the next thing. So the next part is an improv game I've been playing with a few of my guests. I've been calling it Game the Name. We are still working on that name, but that's a conversation for another time. What's going to happen is I'm going to come up with some random idea, and I can promise you that unlike several of the episodes, I have currently spent zero time thinking about it. So it is literally just going to be like a number or an idea or a phrase that I'm just going to like come up with off the cuff, and we're going to spend maybe 5 or 10 minutes trying to get to a like game design around it. It will either be fun or terrible, and there's not a ton of room for variation on that. So
Okay, I'm
all right,
down.
cool. So let's see what we can come up with. So the thing that's been like percolating in my brain is I've been trying a lot of things with like ideas or animals, and I kind of want to just be like, let's push that aside. Let's try something a little bit more abstract. So name of the game is going to be 55.
55.
55.
55. All right, so maybe we're thinking along the lines of like there's 55 players, 55 ideas, 55 items in this game.
Could be. What are you feeling? I will say that 55 players seems like it's going to be a nightmare in terms of management, but that's also because secretly I don't really like 2 rooms and a boom.
Right, yeah, but what if it was an RPG
Okay.
and it was like where it's like you play it once and like it's like a either maybe like one player, it starts with one player and it's like a pyramid scheme where you like sort
Ooh.
of just flush it out where like one player sends one thing to 3 other players and then those 3 players send it to like 3 more players, but it's not like anything too in depth. It's just like maybe like a card with a prompt on it or like a few cards with some prompts on it.
That's actually
And
pretty interesting, like story writing via pyramid scheme, essentially. So I
yeah.
could get some key idea and I could send off basically like 3 different prompts to people who are sitting below me in the pyramid chain. And as they build it
Mhm.
out, what we'll eventually have is we'll have something approaching a novella, right? So if you imagine like everyone has to write, you know, 100 words, and then they send it off to the next to 3 more people, and each of those people has to take those existing prompts and add another 100 words to it. And what you get at the end is something that's essentially like a 55-person influenced narrative with a bunch of different.
Right.
It's almost like a choose your own adventure book at that point, right? Except that it's instead of there being clear branching paths, there's going to be some places where people had different narrative ideas and some places where people like reconverged.
Right, exactly. So
That's pretty
I
fun,
don't know if
actually.
the math would work because I don't know, like, I'm just bad at math and I don't know if like the last, bottom of the pyramid would add up to like 55, like all of it in total. But I mean, that's something to think about.
Yeah, well, let's think here. So,
Or what
trying
if
to
it was
think.
55 words? Like that was like all you're given.
Ooh, that could work. That could work. So yeah, so you every time you pass it down the chain, you get 55. You get to add 55 words to it,
Right.
and so
Yeah.
it's specifically just a story building thing.
Hmm.
And what you do is you essentially spread it virally until you've passed some arbitrary word count threshold. So it could even be depending on how you do it. I'm trying to think here. My like my brain is like, okay, wait, if I have a tree of height 55, how many leaves are at the bottom? And I'm like, that's too many leaves. It can't be that many because you're spreading wider than you are adding content.
Right. So it could be, so if it's like a say a pyramid, right? How
Hmm.
much? I'm very bad at math. So you have one, and then you have the 3 at the bottom, so that's 4. and then you
Right.
have 3 for each of the 3, so that's 12 plus 4, so that's 16. And then I am lost from there.
Okay.
I think it's like
So
36 plus 15.
yeah, so what I'm thinking is if we make it like a binary tree, so instead of it being a pyramid where it like goes 1, 2, 3, 4, it
Uh-huh.
goes 1, 2, 4, 8, 16. So the problem is that at some point, what we're going to see is like that's going to start expanding exponentially,
Right. So
which
we
is
could,
neat.
yeah, we could cap it at like a certain amount of tiers. So if you cap it at, say, like 3 tiers,
Hmm.
and then just like have everyone converge at the very end and like share the story that they've
Hmm.
made, you would come up with like, what is it like? I don't know. Again, I'm very bad at math. Was it 9, 13? Is it 13? Is it 13 people that have written this thing, that have touched this thing?
Maybe this is where my brain's like uh math ads. But I like the core idea. So what you could do is
Yeah.
you could essentially set up a site, right? So you set up some sort of
Hmm.
website and it allows you to like willing participants. You get 3 more people in, and this also accounts for some fraying, right? So let's say you send it to me, Bebo, and I don't know, like let's see here, like Gian.
Hmm.
And basically, like I'm a huge flake, and I just am like, who could be bothered to do 55 of anything? And so you lose my entire tree. You'll still get some depth as people are appending onto the story, and it will start branching continually after that. That sounds pretty
Right.
fun. Like we
Yeah.
should probably take some notes on
And
that.
how you could do this is that like once it's been submitted, that's
Hmm.
been submitted. So you just like type up some stuff, click submit, and then that passes on to the next person. And then at the very end, so technically you would have 9 different stories. So 9 different endings to a story.
Hmm.
So the starting would be the same, the 3 middle parts would always be the same, but then the endings are always you would have like 9 of those.
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah. Oh, you're saying
Yeah.
just spread the tree for the ending.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that
So
could
that way
work.
it's like, you have different variations.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the nice thing is also something like that could offer a lot of like variation to how you want to do the branching, right? So you could have it be like a reverse branch where you have just one person who gets the like Sisyphean task of 55 people are all like, here is our prompt, please end this. They're like, no, this is the wrong way for this to work. It is all the work.
It's way
So
too much work.
I like the idea of that being a variation in the rule book, though, which is just like, hey, you ever want to make a Faustian deal with a writer? Like, trick one of your friends into being the like the
Oh
end
my
node of
god.
this chain, and they're like, how many of these prompts do I have to write? 55. You're like,
That's a lot.
I also really like the idea of us doing something with this space and like making this game and still just calling it 55. And they're like, why is it called 55? And we're like, well, at the time, we didn't really have a good grasp of like the exponential math required here. And so we're like, we could probably like have like a, 55 people thing. And you're like, oh, well, that doesn't work. No, it does not.
I mean, it's the thought that counts, right?
Right.
If it's in the 50s, it's good enough.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's 55 plus or minus maybe like 3 or 8 or 20. Like there's gonna be a number and it's gonna be a good number. Yeah, I think if you could, because the key there, right, is that every single person doesn't have to do that much individual work. They just have to. I mean, it's a multi-level marketing scheme, right? Except we're doing it for a
Right.
storytelling game, not necessarily to sell some product.
Right,
Although
exactly.
someone was selling me some knives, so if you want to buy knives, I can put you down for like a couple orders of.
You know what? My knife inventory is pretty full right now, so
Doesn't surprise me. Doesn't surprise me.
yeah.
I'll follow up. I'll follow up in a few years.
Wait until they're dull.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we both arrived at a pretty good game concept and a really compelling multi-level marketing scheme. So
Yeah,
really, we did 2 things. And that's better.
I think that's a win-win for us.
Probably a lose-lose for everyone that we like are socially connected with. But like that's a them problem. They'll find out long after this
Yeah.
episode's premiered.
Also a future us problem.
Maybe. Cool. Well, we'll spin off that, although I think that's a good idea and we should probably look into it a little bit more deeply. But I've got some questions listed up. We'd love to see what your take is on a few of these and see where we go from here. So, first question, pretty simple one. Actually, now that I think about it, I completely forgot the question that I always ask at the beginning. And by always ask, I mean that I think I've filmed some number of these and I've forgot it about half the time. So honestly, it means that I'm about as spotty on as I'm not on. So we'll say that I always ask it, even though I know patently that's not true. So I hate getting asked this question. So now that I get to ask questions, I get to ask everyone this question. But I'm paraphrasing a bit. But what's Banana playing?
Oh gosh. Right now I am in a campaign with some people. Senthonglim is the GM for it. And it's called We Used to Be Friends, and that is it's powered by the Apocalypse game, and the designer, I believe, is Jonathan. Let me just make sure that I say his name right. I'm just like looking it up real quick. Sorry, just give me one.
This is the whole benefit of like having one of these shows being done while we're both online is that if I'm like, yeah, what's the name of that? Like we can't do math on the internet as we just proved, but
yeah, we're terrible at math, and also mathing on the internet is not a thing for us. But yeah, so the game that Senthonglim is running right now for me and some other people is called We Used to Be Friends, and it's by Jonathan Lavallee, and it's a Powered by the Apocalypse game, which is inspired by like the Veronica Mars, CW teenage, well, maybe not CW now, but CW back in the day, like maybe in the early 2000s, like that kind of detective story for teens where like, things have happened in your town and it's weird. And how do you approach this problem as like, a teen in a weird suburban neighborhood? So that's the game that we're playing right now. Aside from that, I'm not playing much lately. It's just been work. So I'm working on a lot of games, but that's a little different.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Cool. So, when did you first get into gaming, or like what got you into gaming?
So what got me into gaming, like for reals, was probably Monster Hearts by Avery Alder. So before that, I had played I had played D&D. I wasn't really into it because at the time, I was like a kid who was more interested in like drinking and dating. And
Yeah,
when
we're not into that at all.
yeah, I know, right? But then once I started playing Monster Hearts and like all these other indie tabletop RPGs, I realized that like, TTRPGs aren't limited, or RPGs in general aren't limited to just high fantasy. And though I do like my share of high fantasy, I don't like a lot of it. And I don't like, I not that I don't like a lot of it, it's just like the intensity of it and like, the Dungeons and Dragons sort of like vein of high fantasy was interesting to me, but not interesting enough for me to keep like, playing and to keep like interested. So when I found out about Monster Hearts, I was just like, oh, I love Buffy. I love like teen dramas, like supernatural stuff. I am all for this. And it's like super queer. Like, yeah, totally. I'm totally into this. So started playing that, and then I got into like all these other indie RPGs. And I met Ajit George, who introduced me to people like Jason Morningstar and John Stavropoulos and Alex Roberts. Like that was just sort of how I got into the community. And then I think from there, I discovered the Golden Cobra Awards or the Golden Cobra Challenge, because a lot of them, they were judging for it or like, running the back end stuff for that. So I submitted a game. The first game that I submitted was called The Other Place, which is a small LARP where you're basically like mirror selves. So you have your mirror self, and then you have your human self, non-spirit self that's behind the mirror. And so it's played in fours. So there's like the human players, and then like mirror players, and you go back and forth in this mirror dimension. So that was the first game that I wrote for them, and then the second game for the next year was They're Onto Me, which is like a pervasive video LARP, sort of like you're vlogging yourself as this parasitic alien invasion happens, and that won pervasive LARP of the year, I think.
Wow.
And then after that, I started like doing more writing, like little mini module stuff, like for Kids on Bikes. That was something I wrote for. I wrote for North Sea Epilogues, Seven Sea Katai, and then from there, I just like trickled into like all these other writing jobs. For example, Scooby-Doo Betrayal at Mystery Mansion, which is now out at your local Target or Walmart. I don't know. I'm not very good at sales.
It's available.
It's somewhere.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, especially as we approach Halloween. I feel like that is going to be a nice collection of spooky games for, I guess, me to play by myself, but that's a different problem. So, you've done a pretty wide variety of work along a bunch of different game types, game genres. Can you speak to the work you're proudest of?
So right now I think I'm
embarrass you on the spot a little bit.
Oh gosh, yeah. I think like so there's two things I'm super proud of. I think one of them is Jiangshi, the writing for that, just because it's so personal and it's just like it's such a like piece where it's like it's very much about like my culture and my identity, even though like I'm not from the 1920s, and I don't come from. Yeah, you can't really prove that. And you're not like I'm not from a restaurant family, so it's not like it's not like that kind of personal, but it's very personal in terms of like it's about like the family dynamics that I am familiar with, and the culture that I'm familiar with because it's my own culture. So that's something that I'm proud of, and also hopping vampires are awesome. So that's a thing that I'm really proud of. Definitely super inspired by Monster Hearts and all these other indie RPGs. Mm-hmm. So that, and working with Sevenfold Limb, he's just like been such a great like mentor and creator. Like collaborating with him has just been like really awesome.
He seems like a blast to collaborate with.
So like that, he's like, yeah, he's great, because there are things like sometimes when you think of like working on a project for so long, or after you've played so many games that are sort of similar, you sort of just like get stagnant in the way that you think. And like working with him, he sort of thinks outside the box, or like thinks about like other things that more usually like I wouldn't think about until like we get into the nitty gritty, and he's just like, wait a second, what if we just redid the whole thing? What if we just like do this instead? And I'm just like, whoa, okay, sure, like let's do it, I guess. We're doing this. There's
the dream
that,
and
also,
the danger.
Yeah, exactly. Like there's that, and then also just sometimes I would get like a whole lot of messages from him with like different podcasts and like pieces of media to listen to, and I'm just like, oh, whoa, okay, first of all, it's like 3 a.m, but I'll get to it. The next morning I would like go through this list of media, and it's all just like very good, and all just like makes sense to like what we were working on. Mm-hmm. And so like getting to talk to someone or work with someone who's like also really interested in finding those kinds of pieces of inspiration for a project, for any sort of like thing that we're working on, that's been great, because I feel like I work similarly in mm-hmm. terms of like the things I'm interested in.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Oh, and then the other thing that I'm really proud of is just like these little, experimental weird LARPs and things. Like I'm just really into them.
No, that's great though. So let's talk a little bit more about the first one. You talked a little about more the idea of, exploring your own culture and, I mean, your love of hopping vampires and etc. What made you really want to explore this topic via an RPG?
I think it's hard to do this sort of medium in any other type of tabletop game. So I think that because there are so many nuances in the culture and so many nuances in like the experience itself, like the immigrant experience specifically, I don't think that a board game would be able to do it justice, or at least for me, I don't think it would. And like maybe that's just me restricted to thinking about like tabletop RPGs or role playing games in general, but that's generally what I think about like the tabletop RPG or RPGs sphere in general, like just that it provides space for nuance, it provides space for storytelling, and being able to have the opportunity to like talk about like all these stories like fun and interesting way, like that's something that I don't see very often in board games, and when I do see it in board games it's like presented a little differently.
Right. And I think a lot of board games that do succeed in like providing emotional experiences for the players tends to still incorporate a very large storytelling component, right? So like even if
Right.
you want to talk about like Fog of Love, yes, is board gamey, but so much of it is focused on like highlighting player interaction, highlighting the story, and generating a story together.
Right, exactly. So I think it's like it's sort of that spot like storytelling games. Like
Mhm.
storytelling games are very different from like both RPGs and board games, but it
Right.
does have elements of both.
Right, yeah. And you sort of like it's sort of the transitional state, right? You talk a little bit more about board games, you're talking about more mechanic focused, like storytelling games, you've still got some hybrid there between there, and then RPGs, you're delving more into the narrative side of things. At least it's been my experience with them. And that's fun. It's just that there are certain topics that are harder to explore. Although I guess an RPG about being a like lowly gem trader in the Mediterranean during like the height of the Renaissance might be interesting in some way. You're just like Splendor, the RPG, and you're like, I suppose you could have made this.
I mean, yeah.
Maybe you could just go full Assassin's Creed and just be like, ah, yes, I am gem trading with my best friend Leonardo da Vinci. You're like, why do you know everyone? But no, neither here nor there.
I feel
Anyways,
like that could be sort of fun, but yeah, sorry, go
I
on.
feel like as long as you committed to not taking it seriously at all, like you're like you've just been invited to the Borgias, and you're like, wow, Medici, and you're just throwing out a bunch of like. I have a very good friend who is very very into like the Medicis and the Borgias, and the fact that I've just said them both without much context means that she's gonna show up at my house with a knife probably in like 45 to 50 hours. But that's a me problem. Signing off for good. Um, oh man, yeah, I probably won't tell her about this.
Probably a good idea.
Just gonna hope she doesn't watch this episode. Anyways, so in addition to the creative side, you also sit on the publishing side via Game and a Curry. Can you talk to me more about what prompted your desire to exist in the publisher space as well?
Yeah, sure. So I think like in between all of the stuff, right? Like I think in between discovering RPGs and like getting into like gaming in general, I somehow got into board games. And
Sorry.
uh no, it's all good. My partner and I, Herb. So Herb Furman, he's the one who's just like, we should do a blog, we should do like, all this stuff. And so we started writing about like restaurants that we would go to and board games, like sort of pairing them up. And we used to go to like curry restaurants a lot. So it was a lot of Japanese curry. We used to have like this one Indian spot we used to go to like all the time. Um, and we would just like play games there, or like get into try to break out like a small game at the dinner table.
Hmm.
And then from there, that's when we started writing a blog, and we called it Game and a Curry. And then somewhere along the line, we were like, hey, we have some friends who make games. Why don't we help them publish stuff? And that's how it happened.
Makes sense.
So yeah, so our first game was Diamonds. That was by Brian Soriano and Dave Beaver. And then the second game was Herb's game, Judge Dredd Block War, which he's like a massive Judge Dredd fan. I'm a big fan as well, but nowhere near as like fanatic as he is. And so he had been working on this thing for a while, and I was eventually like, hey, let's just publish this thing. Let's just get the license. Let's see how it works. If we get the license, we get the license. If we don't, whatever. So we got the license somehow. And we published the game, and that was our second game. I think our third game was Tamayang's Lair. So he made like this worker placement game. He had been working on this for, I want to say, like 5 years, and eventually we were just like, why don't we publish this and get it out the door for you? So that's our third game. The fourth game is the most recent Battle of the Boy Bands. That was recently on Kickstarter by Cleo Youngsu Davis and Vicky Ho. And then our fifth one is Jiangshi, which we're co-publishing with Wet Ink. So that's our first RPG, but fifth published game, I guess, or fifth in the process of publishing a game.
Right. So the ideal pairing for Battle of the Boy Bands, restaurant-wise, is Buca de Beppo, right? Is that like the?
Oh yeah,
the
absolutely. Yeah. To give everyone a bit of context, so a while ago, I think it was like last year, Gen Con or something like that.
Yeah, so 20 years ago. Just in terms of how it feels right now.
20 years ago. 20 years ago at 2019, I made a whole bunch of people go to Buca de Beppo with us and play Battle of the Boy Bands while eating pasta.
She says made us go to Buca de Beppo like I wasn't going for the garlic bread already. Like, I was gonna go to Buca de Beppo. Like, in terms of Gen Con food, that is actually surprisingly high quality relative to the other food you can get at Gen Con.
Oh, yeah. I think, I love Buca de Beppo. Across the board.
Buca de Beppo is like a nightmare of a restaurant just in terms of like its energy. Like, I really truly think that if I had to think of like a restaurant that existed at the end of the universe, like at the real edge between like creation and madness, it would probably be either Buca de Beppo or the Cheesecake Factory.
I would say both. Yeah.
Like the Cheesecake Factory is some like cursed amalgam of like architecture and cuisines, but Buca de Beppo has just got a really intense energy.
I feel like Rainforest Cafe should be there somewhere as well.
I think Rainforest Cafe is actually already in the chaos. Like it's in the primordial entropy, and it's like reaching out one like tree frog hand, being like, "Come join us," and it like wraps around your leg, and you're like, this is fine. As it like drags you in.
Everything's fine.
That's been my opinion about Rainforest Cafe since I was very young. I was just like, something is wrong and I can't figure out what it is.
It's still, I feel like that and Medieval Times, like there's something happened. Like
Medieval Times gave into the void a long time ago. Like it just exists there. Like it's some kind of nightmare. I'm into it, but it's some kind of nightmare. I think I've only been
like some level of hell.
Yeah. It's like the SeaWorld of restaurants. You're just sort of like, everything here is wrong, and yet I am here, so am I wrong? And it presents more existential questions than it answers. I feel like we could have an entire segment on just like deeply analyzing Medieval Times.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So
and their pay is terrible.
Oh yeah, it's a good podcast idea right there. Just like restaurants, entropy and chaos, and just like the intersection between like today we're gonna talk about Bubba Gump, like the whole concept.
I've never been, and I really want to go.
It's something. It is it's just an energy for like people whose Forrest Gump is their favorite movie, and I have never met anyone whose favorite movie is Forrest Gump. So it's just it's a restaurant that exists in this weird like frozen moment in time where everyone loves Forrest Gump completely unironically, so much so that they would go to a series of themed restaurants.
I really want to go here.
It's still doing great. Like it's still up. It's in most tourist places. But
Oh
I
God,
don't
wow.
understand who it's for.
Yeah.
Like it's wild to me because it's just like this the to give you more insight than you need. So the tables, if you want to get your server's attention, they have
Mhm.
two signs. There's the Run Forest Run sign, which is everything's good, you don't need to stop by, and there's a Stop Forest Stop sign, which is like, oh hey, could we get help with something? And ironically, this is a lot better than some of the like terrible restaurant behaviors that I've seen because all you do is you flip the sign and then eventually someone notices the sign and they come over and help you. It's you signaling without having to be one of those terrible guests who like raises their hand or like tries to snap at the waiter or something horrible. But
Right. Yeah.
it's got a weird energy around Dr. Pepper. Like it's all very Forrest Gump themed. Like they're playing like scenes from it in the restaurant. It's yeah, I don't
Do you think that when they came up with this theme, they were like, Forrest Gump is going to be a timeless movie, and this will outlive everything?
yes, I do, as a matter of fact. I think that whoever made it was like on top of a hill and they're like, Forrest Gump is gonna be a movie people are gonna watch forever and I'm never gonna die. And
Oh my
like
God.
that was their gift from like Restaurant Cassandra or something. I don't know. We should actually like sit down and just have a long form thought on like the chaos energy of restaurants. Because I got a lot of opinions on a lot of places, and there are a lot of chains that are just odd.
I love weird chain restaurants. That is like everything
Like
that I'm
like
about.
like Big Boy.
What's Big Boy?
Big Boy was like a restaurant, like a fast foodish adjacent chain in like I want to say the 80s or 90s. It was really big, and it just every place out front of it had this like statue of a child holding like a plate of food, and it was like if Astro Boy got like covered in carbonite, but it was clear
Yes.
carbonite. You could still see his like horrified smile.
I've seen one of those. I know what you're talking about. Okay. Yes. Those are incredible.
Yeah, there's a lot of places. Anyway, we're getting into the weeds and also just the like deep. I'm feeling existential dread. Well,
That's, yeah, that's a lot of what I play on in general. I think that's just my
this would
energy.
be a really fun post-pandemic podcast though. Just going to like a lot of chain restaurants as an adult and just sitting down and be like, this is such a weird place.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I live in the Bay Area, so there's a lot of chain restaurants here. We could actually make this happen. We'll put a bookmark in it.
Yes, I love this idea. We should do it.
It's a good idea. Anyway, so on the subject of good ideas, I do want to talk a fair bit about Scooby-Doo Betrayal at Mystery Mansion. So I
Ooh.
have in my notes, and I haven't quite read the rule book, so I believe this is correct, that you are credited as the head honcho on Mystery Mansion.
Oh my God.
Yeah,
Is that actually?
I wish.
Oh
That's what's in my
no.
notes.
Oh,
So
oh, right. Okay. I think you prepared me for this joke earlier, and I remember it now.
that's the best part. I prepped you for the joke, and then you forgot about it, and I got to get two instances of that joke with the same person. It's the dream. Can you talk us a bit more through what your work on the game entailed?
Yeah, so I used to watch Scooby-Doo as a kid growing up. So I am a big fan of the IP in general. So what the actual title meant was that I had to watch a whole bunch of episodes of Scooby-Doo and pick and choose the ones that would fit, well with the betrayal.
Oh no, what
The
a
betrayal.
challenge. What a tough time that must have been.
It was so hard. It was so tough.
Yeah, I've been trying to do a gamification project at work, and I'm slowly trying to convince my coworkers that if we're going to look into more like games as an idea, that I should be able to expense more video games for research purposes. And they're almost sold on it. Like I'm getting really close. Like I'm like, yeah, you should let me expense this. And they're like, well, that could be a good idea.
Hey, I just expensed a whole lot of Jackbox games for work, so if I could do it, I'm
Ugh,
pretty sure.
so lucky. Jackbox 7 comes out next month. I'm so hyped.
Ooh, I did
Yeah,
not know that,
yeah, you're welcome. See,
but I'm very
everyone's
excited
learning
right now.
on late night table talk. Okay, okay. So if you had to do a bunch of research for it, can you tell me what your favorite like Scooby-Doo series and favorite character are? Do you have favorites? I know it's a tough question always.
Okay, so I think my favorite episode, actually, can I say two episodes? I'm going to
Yeah,
say two episodes. So there were two episodes. One of them is the Disc Demon. So that's from the original Scooby-Doo Where Are You series. I think that's season 2 or 3. So the Disc Demon is the most ridiculous episode because they're in a recording studio
good.
and the recording studio is haunted by a disc demon. And later on, they realize that, spoiler alert, at the very end, they realize it's like one of the executives. And if
Right,
you piece together some of like the manuscripts written out by like one of the musicians, you discover that they're spelling out ACE, which is Ace Deuce, the villain of the entire piece. So
good.
that's like one of my favorite episodes. Silly wise, like that, and also this other episode that was called it was at Wimbledon. So the
Of course it
characters were at
was.
Wimbledon, and yes. Oh, Warlock of Wimbledon. That's it. So it's
Oh
a
yeah,
warlock, and he's got a dog, and you
as
have
you
to
do.
like make sure, yeah, and you have to make sure that like the Scooby gangs, they're technically not called the Scooby Gang, but the Scooby Gang's friend who's competing in the Wimbledon tournament is okay. His name's Jimmy Felton, and he's just like this goofy guy who keeps seeing visions of this warlock everywhere.
Right.
So you have to like make sure that or they have to make sure that he's okay, and like they catch the bad guy at the very end, which is one of the haunts that you can play. So there's that one, and there's also like the Ace Deuce episode that I mentioned earlier that's also available in the Scooby-Doo game. So those are like my favorite goofy episodes. The less goofy episode, I would say, or less goofy uh, Scooby thing in general was a movie, and that was Return to Zombie Island, I think that was
Yeah.
called. But there are zombies, but they're not like the main thing of the thing. Like they're not the main antagonist of like the whole movie.
Hmm.
Like the main
Right.
antagonists are these cat people.
Oh,
Um, yeah, but they're also like as you watch it, you're just like, oh, I feel kind of bad for these cat people. Like, there's that dilemma of like maybe they're actually right in like being
these cat
terrible,
people make some very good points.
Yeah,
Me
like
sitting in the audience of cats.
yeah, exactly. So I would say like that's another one of my favorites.
Fourth
That and
podcast idea. We just go through everything every property that has cats in it and rate how jellical the cats are.
oh my gosh,
Just
so I love Cats, like the musical, like the
no,
movie.
I know. It's very
I
consistent with
love
your
the
energy.
movie. I absolutely love it. It's so chaotic. I love it. The musical itself, not so much, but the movie, 100%.
I watched the musical when I was very young, and I really got to like. I know my parents are never going to watch this, but like, why the hell would you show a child the musical Cats? I wasn't emotionally prepared for that.
It's a very, how should I say it? Horny.
Again, I wasn't prepared for that. Ugh.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay. So, yeah, I think for me, I tend to lean Mystery Incorporated. Like I just watched it a few months ago. Really enjoyed it, although it's over the top, but in a fun, like lore-based way. My particular favorite bit is at one point they're going through the Hall of Villains inside of Crystal Cove, and Daphne sees a statue of Scrappy Doo, and she's like, "Oh man, isn't that?" And she's about to say it, and Fred like walks up and is like, "Daphne, no. We said we would never speak of him again." And they just
Yes.
walk off. It's just
Scrappy, there's a reason for that.
yeah.
And yeah.
So speaking of the haunts, Was there like one that got away, like a haunt that you really wanted to make that you didn't get around to incorporating?
Mm, I don't think so. There are a lot
Yeah.
of them, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I really wanted to make sure that the Salem one got in there, the one with the witches, uh, and they're like, that was like one of the movies that I really enjoyed.
I was always a Cyber Chase fan
Uh,
myself.
oh yeah, that was a good one too. That was hilarious. Uh,
I just remember watching it and like being like maybe 8 or 9 and be like, this doesn't, what's happening here? Like
yeah.
that and the Harlem Globetrotters episode, I think, are the two that I remember the best.
Yes. Oh yeah, that was a great episode.
They had all those
Yeah,
crossover ones and
actually,
they were
okay.
great. So we've seen a fair number of energy happening in the Betrayal space lately. Betrayal Baldur's Gate, Betrayal Mystery Mansion, the Widow's Walk expansion, Betrayal Legacy. Is there any particular property you think would lend itself well to a Betrayal style game?
Oh, um, gosh. Okay, so I feel like this is more like a horror movie end of things, right?
Sure.
So I
There.
personally really like Haunting of Hill House,
Mm.
but then it's just like imagine the title for that, Betrayal at, you know.
Betrayal at the house on the hill house.
Yes, yes.
Hill.
I think
Like
that'd just be
it
really
just starts
funny.
trailing off and there's just more variants of hill and house on the box. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, okay, so this is just like a me thing. Like this will never get done because
That's
I'm
the
pretty sure
type.
that like yeah, like anyone on the betrayal team would be like the banana, what are you talking about? This is stupid. But um I think like that or like, Ari Aster, anything that's like Ari Aster, right? Like if we had like a like a maybe like a A24 type thing
Mhm.
for Betrayal, like that would be my dream. No one else's, but I would really enjoy it.
I've always really wanted like a pirate ship betrayal where it's like, you play as like a pirate crew who's just like constructing their boat and then you go on the high seas and like mermaids attack or something. And I feel like
Oh.
this could be a lot of fun. That's all I'm saying. Like that or one that's set purely in space because the space one at least lends itself well to the same like 3 floors of the house sort of thing, right? You've got like different sectors of space and you like go through nebulas and stuff. I've
That would
never
be super fun.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I think Betrayal is really probably the game that got me most into like modern board games because that's
Hmm.
the game that we just played. I think we still have a very like old post-it note in the old one where we would cross out a haunt once we'd done it, and we just kept trying to make sure we never repeated haunts. So we got through all the
Yeah.
base game, and I think about half of Widow's Walk before we finally we're like we've hit probably 100-ish plays of Betrayal. Like
Oh wow.
yeah, we never played Fire Bats. We definitely have some ones with like huge X's on them that we never want to play again because they're and
Mhm.
what is the old saying? It's 50 it's 100 floors of frights. They're not all going to be winners. Like there's 50 haunts in the base game. I'm not going to
Now that I
love
think
all of
about it,
them.
do you remember that movie 13 Ghosts?
So you got to remember, I have the like horror tolerance
Oh, right, right, right. Okay.
of like
Um,
a Kleenex box.
okay, so I think that 13 Ghosts would probably be perfect and like easy to do for Betrayal. It's just like a whole bunch of ghosts.
Mhm.
And in the movie, Matthew Lillard's in it. The guy who plays Spike from Buffy is in it. But basically, it's like this eccentric billionaire who's trapped a whole bunch of ghosts, murderous ghosts, in a house, and things happen.
As you do. I feel
Yeah.
like you could probably, if you like really like twisted your brain around it, you could probably make a really good like. Remember the old Justice League Unlimited like TV show, like the cartoon?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like you could probably do something with that. Like you could have like because they had a very like villain like I think the Scooby-Doo property I think does a good job of proving that if you have like a villain of the week format, you can do something pretty good in like the haunt spaces. So you could have like oh yeah you play as like Superman, the Flash, Wonder Woman, Batman,
Yeah.
Green Arrow maybe. And like in one of the haunts, Lex Luthor shows up, and you're like, ah, Lex Luthor, etc. As you do. Me on the street, in my day to day, I drop $20. I'm like, ah, Lex Luthor. Like this is a
Yeah.
real problem I have. Anyway, with the time we've got left, how much do you want to talk about the game that we're working on?
Let's just go all out. Why not? I mean, we're talking about superheroes anyway, so I
Sure.
think we should.
Yeah, natural segue. This was intentional.
Yeah, totally intentional.
Yeah. Well. Tell us more about it. I'll let you. I'll let you lead on that one.
Yeah, so it's a live action online game that we're working on where the players take on the roles of uh, insurance sales agents or insurance agents in general, and the claims that they have to go through are actually superhero damages. So, say, Wonder Woman just threw like a monster into, a water tower. What are the claims for that? Like, how is that process? What does that process look like? How much money do we have to put into damages?
Right.
So that's the entire game, and it's all played through Zoom
And it's mostly
and
us
roll
just arguing
20.
about things like I don't necessarily think so. Wonder Woman is, I think in some canons the daughter of Zeus, if I'm correct. And so technically, as a demigod, we don't cover damages from acts of God, so that claim would technically be denied.
Right, exactly.
Right? It
And then
depends on whether or
meanwhile,
not, yeah, it depends on whether or not you consider Wonder Woman doing the damage, or like if she was fighting Cheetah and she threw Cheetah into the water tower, would that be like Cheetah's fault? Unclear.
right,
Right.
exactly. And it's also dependent on like who's making the claim too,
Right.
right? Like, so is people who are in charge of the water tower, is it the town? Is it the monster? Like, there are all these questions.
Right, exactly. Questions that only intrepid insurance folks such as ourselves can answer.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh man, it's a blast. I got to be the bad boy of insurance last time.
I love your sunglasses. That was great.
The dream. So good. Anyway, yeah, we're still playtesting it. We're making progress there, and we'll hopefully have more to announce as that comes around.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I wanted to thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. I had a blast talking to you, always do. I'm serious though, we should start that like restaurants with threatening auras podcast
Yes,
and
please.
just see where it goes. Because I feel like this would give me the opportunity to go to a bunch of restaurants that I don't really want to go to. Like I could go to like, have you ever been to a Black Bear Diner?
Yes, I have.
Yeah,
They
there's
are
something.
weird.
There's something there. Like, have you ever been to an Eaton Park?
No.
Okay, so that's localized to like the West Virginia, Pennsylvania area, and they sell these like smiley face cookies, and it's got like a 50s diner energy, but like a 70s restaurant aesthetic.
Okay, think of this. Betrayal at chaotic restaurants.
Ooh, so you just like you basically are building out this restaurant, and then you find out, oh God, we accidentally constructed a cheesecake factory.
Exactly.
I think it could work. Like I think it's again, it's got a very sinister energy. Like yeah, we should do some more research into this. I think we should probably not do any actual research into the restaurants,
Oh
but
no.
just go in and have like a lengthy conversation about like why are all KFCs like this? Like I went to a restaurant in local to me. It's called The Counter. All their bathroom doors are Norman doors, if you're familiar with that concept.
Oh, what's
But
that?
it's a door with a handle that looks like you should pull it, but it is in fact a push door.
I hate
And
those
I'm
doors.
like, I just want to go to the bathroom. Like, yeah,
Those are so, yeah, I
Norman
hate those.
doors. Oh yeah. Anyway, it's been great having you on. Thank you so much, and we'll talk soon. Looking forward
Thank
to it.
you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. See you later.
Bye.
Well, that's all the time we've got for you tonight. So please join us next time for another episode of Late Night Table Talk.